Danielle Cross stood frozen at the server station, calculator in one hand, a creased receipt in the other. Around her, Belle's grill throbbed with life, clattering dishes, sizzling meats, laughter, arguments, the rhythmic ballet of a Friday night rush. But none of it reached her. All Danielle could hear was the soft static of betrayal echoing in her mind. Her eyes were locked on the tip distribution sheet tacked to the staff bulletin board. Numbers stared back like cold, unblinking eyes. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong, and tonight, it had finally snapped into focus. "Hey, you okay?" Marcus, one of the newer servers, brushed past her, nudging her elbow as he reached for a water pitcher. "You look like you're trying to calculate the national debt over there." Danielle forced a half-smile. "Just checking my math." But it wasn't her math she was double-checking. It was the invisible arithmetic happening behind closed doors. Figures that didn't add up, discrepancies that grew louder the more she tried to ignore them. For 3 weeks, a gnawing suspicion had been chewing at her, quiet and persistent like a leaky faucet in the back of her mind. Tonight, it became certainty, ice-cold and undeniable. Marcy's name was gone again. Marcy Torres wasn't just a co-worker. She was the heart of Belle's Grill. For 7 years, she'd served tables with grace and grit, always remembering a regular's drink order or asking after someone's grandkid. She made customers feel like they mattered. And when the cancer diagnosis blindsided her 2 months ago, the staff didn't hesitate. They organized meal trains, covered her shifts, checked in on her with teary eyes and hopeful smiles. But in all their well-meaning support, there was one crucial promise left unsaid, that she wouldn't be forgotten. No one had spoken about it, but Danielle had assumed, everyone had assumed, Marcy would still receive her share of pooled tips while on medical leave. It was Belle's official policy, after all. If a staff member had worked partial shifts in the final week before medical leave, they were entitled to a portion of that week's tips, plus a calculated average based on past earnings. It wasn't much, maybe a few $100s a week, but to someone drowning in hospital bills, it was air. Danielle slid her phone from her apron, fingers moving with quiet determination. Over the past month, she'd started snapping photos of the tip sheets. At first, she couldn't explain why, just a gut feeling. But now, her instincts had proof. Week 1, Marcy was listed for 3 partial shifts. $0. Week 2, same schedule, same 0. Week 3, her name vanished altogether, like she'd never stood behind the bar, never run a tray, never belonged here. Danielle's heart thundered in her chest as she stared at the proof. The theft wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, incremental, but theft nonetheless. Danielle. The bark of her name cracked through her thoughts. Brad Kowalski, the assistant manager, stood scowling from behind the bar. His usual look of barely contained impatience deepened the grooves in his narrow face. Table 12 been waiting 5 minutes for drinks. This isn't study hall. Coming, Danielle said quickly, folding the tip sheet and tucking it into her apron like contraband. She spun toward the bar, shaking off the fog of fury long enough to pour cocktails with practiced precision. But even as she dropped lemon slices into glasses and wiped rims, her mind kept calculating. The tip pool each week ranged between $4,800, 0 cents, and $6,200, 0 cents. Split among 15 employees, that meant Marcy's weekly share should have hovered around $320, 0 cents. Not a windfall, but enough to cover groceries, gas, or a portion of her prescriptions. Where the hell was that money going? Drinks in hand, Danielle made her way to table 12. A young couple clearly in love, holding hands and whispering secrets. She delivered their cocktails with a soft smile, but her eyes strayed to the kitchen, where the new dishwasher was watching her. Paul. Quiet. maybe mid-50s with silver in his hair and dishpan hands that had clearly scrubbed more plates than most would in a lifetime. He didn't say much, but tonight his gaze held something different. Awareness. As Danielle passed by, dropping off empty glasses, Paul spoke. "Everything all right?" She blinked, surprised. The kitchen crew usually kept their heads down. "Just thinking," she said carefully. Paul dried a glass, his expression unreadable. "Dangerous habit in a place like this," he murmured, his voice low and almost too soft to catch. "I should know." Something in his tone sent a chill up her spine. Not fear, but recognition. A warning dressed as small talk. For the first time, Danielle wondered if she wasn't the only one who'd noticed the math didn't add up. There was something in Paul's voice, low and measured, that made Danielle pause mid-step. She turned to look at him fully, really see him for the first time. He spoke like someone who'd witnessed things unravel, not just at a table over spilled wine, but behind the curtain, where real messes brewed. His eyes, alert and calculating, didn't match the quiet posture of a man meant to blend into the background. She suddenly realized that Paul was watching more than dishes. The rest of her shift became a haze of orders called out too quickly and customers growing restless. The noise and heat seemed to press in closer, but Danielle's mind wasn't in the restaurant anymore. It was in the numbers, swimming through tips, earnings, and the cold arithmetic of injustice. When the last table left and the doors finally locked behind them, Danielle slipped into a back corner of the dining room and pulled out a small notebook she'd bought that morning. If she couldn't trust what was being recorded, she'd build her own paper trail. She began with what she knew, her own tips from the past 3 weeks, cross-referencing her hours with daily posted sales figures. She broke everything down into meticulous columns. It wasn't advanced math, but the weight of what it uncovered left her breathless. Nearly $960.00 had vanished, gone not only from Marcy's rightful share, but skimmed from several other employees too. Small enough amounts to pass under most people's radar, but not hers. Someone was bleeding the staff dry, slowly, subtly, and they were counting on everyone being too tired, too distracted, or too grateful just to have a job to notice. Danielle stared at the page, her pen frozen in her grip. For a moment, she considered calling Marcy, but it was past midnight. Her friend was probably curled under blankets, trying to rest after another draining chemotherapy session. Instead of interrupting her, Danielle made a promise. She would track every missing dollar, every shift misrepresented, every line that didn't add up, and whoever thought they could steal from someone already fighting for her life, they were about to learn what quiet people like Danielle were capable of. Across the restaurant, Paul dried his hands on a dish towel. His eyes narrowed slightly. He'd been watching Danielle more closely ever since that first night. She wasn't just complaining, she was investigating, and now she was risking something big. Paul had a feeling her story was about to spiral into something far more dangerous than misplaced tip money. 3 weeks later, Bell's Grill hummed with unusual joy. It was bonus day, the quarterly celebration where management handed out cash like confetti and tried to convince the staff they were all one big happy family. Someone had gone all out with decorations, balloons in Bell's signature colors, a cheap sheet cake that read Team Bell's Rocks in blue frosting, and an upbeat playlist echoing off the tile walls. Danielle stood in the break room, staring down at the envelope in her hands, feeling like the air had been knocked from her lungs. Inside it was a check, $3,500.00, the largest bonus she'd received in 4 years. According to the letter, it was recognition for her outstanding customer service and leadership during a challenging quarter. And a challenging quarter. Holy crap! Marcus breathed, leaning over her shoulder. That's like 3 months' rent. Danielle gave a faint nod, barely hearing him. The paper trembled slightly in her fingers. She wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about Marcy. At home, in the dark, maybe having to choose between paying for treatment or heating her apartment. It wasn't right. None of it was. She looked up, her voice clear and calm despite the turmoil inside. I need to speak with HR. Marcus grabbed her arm. Are you serious? You just got a golden ticket and you're about to complain. But she was already walking toward the small office tucked behind the kitchen, where Linda Vasquez sat behind a metal desk, still passing out the last of the envelopes with her usual air of exasperated efficiency. Linda, can I speak with you privately? Danielle asked. Linda glanced up with the kind of look that made employees feel like a nuisance. Can it wait? I'm on a deadline here. It's about my bonus. I want to redirect it. That made Linda freeze. Her brows lifted, the annoyance dropping for a flicker of surprise, then something else, quickly masked. Redirected? It's Marcy Torres. She's on medical leave. She needs it more than I do. Linda's expression twitched. Huh. That's unusual. Are you sure? It's a substantial amount. Unsure. Well, there would be paperwork and tax complications. And honestly, Danielle, I have to ask, is everything okay at home? Sometimes people make emotional decisions under financial pressure. Everything's fine, Danielle said, her voice hardening. This is my choice. I just want to help a friend. And unbeknownst to either of them, Paul stood at the kitchen pass, quietly stacking trays, eyes locked on the exchange. His hands didn't stop moving, but his attention sharpened. This was big. Danielle was handing over $3,500, 0 cents, without blinking. That wasn't just kindness, it was conviction. Or desperation. Linda pulled out a stack of forms, thick, excessive, and began a rapid explanation of tax consequences and corporate red tape. Danielle signed them all, eyes firm. Then Paul noticed something. Linda's face. Not concern, not admiration, panic. She muttered something about needing to run it by Brad. When Danielle asked why, after all, it was her money, Linda cited a vague policy about needing supervisor approval. Paul frowned. In all his years, he'd never heard of such a policy. Either Bell's Grill had written its own rulebook, or Linda was scrambling to buy time. How long will this take? Danielle asked. A few days, maybe a week. These things have to go through channels, Linda said, stacking the forms with deliberate slowness. Danielle signed the last line with a sharp stroke. Fine. Just make sure it gets to her. She's counting on it. After Danielle left, Linda remained seated, staring at the papers. Then she reached for the phone and dialed a number from memory. Brad, we have a problem, she whispered. It's Danielle Cross. She's trying to redirect her entire bonus to Marcy. Yes, that Marcy, I know. But she's being persistent. Paul strained to hear the reply, but couldn't make it out. What he could see was the way Linda's face paled. When she hung up, she opened a different drawer, one she hadn't touched before, and pulled out another set of forms, writing quickly, glancing at the door between lines like a woman expecting someone to burst in. Paul's gut twisted. Something was deeply wrong here. Danielle's simple act of generosity had exposed a fault line, and management was scrambling to keep it from cracking wide open. He finished his shift in silence, eyes shadowed with new purpose. Danielle had lit a fuse, and Paul suspected it was only a matter of time before it all exploded. 2 nights later, Paul did something unusual. He volunteered for closing duty. Dishwashers usually bolted after final call, But Paul had learned that the real secrets of any operation revealed themselves only after the lights dimmed, when people stopped watching their backs. "You sure you don't mind staying late, Paul?" Jenny, the closing server, asked. He gave her a smile. "I don't mind at all." Because tonight, Paul wasn't just washing dishes. He was digging for the truth. "Don't mind at all," Paul replied, the edges of a plan already forming in his mind. The hum of the industrial fridge, the distant echo of clinking utensils being sorted, the emptiness of the post-shift quiet. He liked this. After the storm of the dinner rush, it was the calm that allowed thoughts to sharpen, strategies to unfold. By 11:30 p.m., the restaurant was a ghost town, save for Paul and the steady red blink of the security system's motion sensor light. He'd offered to mop the floors and sanitize surfaces, a routine end-of-night task. But tonight it gave him an excuse to move through every corner of Bell's Grill, including the administrative offices. When he gently eased open the drawer of Linda's desk and found it unlocked, a chill slithered down his spine. Buried beneath generic HR documents, insurance forms, and a stack of company policies was a manila folder marked Tip Distribution Records, internal use only. What Paul discovered inside turned the chill into a stabbing frost. There were 2 sets of records. One matched the sheets posted publicly for employees, a collection of carefully curated, sanitized numbers. But the second set told the real story. According to the internal documents, Bell's Grill had been collecting an average of $7,200.00 in weekly tips, about $1,500.00 more than what was reported to the staff. That discrepancy wasn't an accident. It wasn't a typo. It was orchestrated theft. Not just Marcy's missing share, but money stolen systematically from every staff member who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. Paul's hands, though steady from years of hiding his real skill set behind blue-collar humility, trembled ever so slightly as he photographed every page with methodical care. But what he saw next made everything click into place. Marcy wasn't alone. Sandra Chin, on maternity leave. Miguel Rodriguez, recovering from a car crash. Jennifer Walsh, taking care of her terminally ill mother. All absent from the official tip records. All legally entitled to a share. All erased. And the missing funds? They weren't vanishing. They were redirected to names Paul didn't recognize, employees listed as working full-time hours but rarely seen. Their social security numbers followed sequential patterns like they'd been made up on a spreadsheet. Ghost workers. That's when Paul understood. This wasn't just wage theft. It was a laundering operation. "Find anything interesting?" His heart jerked into his throat. He spun around to find Danielle in the doorway, her arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Hey, I was just cleaning," Paul stammered, snapping the folder shut. "With your phone out?" she replied coolly, stepping into the office and closing the door behind her. "Look, I don't know who you really are, Paul, but you're not just a dishwasher snooping around the manager's desk." He looked at her for a long beat. She was sharp. Not just observant, but brave, relentless. The kind of person who asked questions even when the answers scared her. The kind of ally he needed. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm not just a dishwasher, but I'm not your enemy either." He laid his phone on the desk and turned the screen toward her. "In fact, I think we're after the same thing." For the next 20 minutes, Paul walked her through what he'd found. Each forged record, every redirection of stolen wages. Danielle pulled out her notebook, her hands steady as she cross-checked his discoveries with her own carefully logged numbers. She wasn't just listening, she was processing, connecting dots faster than most auditors he'd worked with in his past life. "This explains everything," she whispered, running a finger down one of the columns. "I thought it was just Marcy. But they're stealing from everyone who can't fight back." Paul nodded grimly. And the scariest part, those fake employees, they're the loophole. Someone's created ghosts on the payroll to justify the vanishing funds. It's a shell game. Danielle's jaw clenched. So while Marcy's skipping chemo to keep the lights on, Brad and Linda are padding their pockets with fake identities? Exactly. And your bonus transfer request? That probably spooked them. It would have created a financial trail connecting the missing money back to a real person, someone they'd tried to erase. Danielle's voice sharpened. Then we have to confront them, now. No, Paul raised a hand. Not yet. If we go at them without airtight proof, they'll cover their tracks, destroy evidence. Maybe even fire you. We need to move carefully. Then what? She asked, voice low, urgent. Paul hesitated. He'd spent years operating behind the scenes in corporate investigations. It was second nature to stay hidden. But now, with the stakes this personal, anonymity was no longer a luxury. We find out how deep it goes, he said. Talk to the others, Sandra, Miguel, Jennifer. There might be more. Danielle nodded slowly, fire in her eyes. I can speak to some of the senior staff. They trust me. Good. But be careful. If Linda and Brad are in on this, they might not be alone. They were about to leave when Paul surprised even himself. Danielle, he said, his voice softer, what you did, offering your entire bonus to Marcy, that took real courage. She scoffed bitterly. Courage? I felt powerless. I still feel powerless. Paul looked her in the eye, his words deliberate. You're stronger than you think, and after tonight, they should be the ones feeling helpless. But neither of them saw the camera blinking in the upper corner of the office, the one Linda had quietly installed weeks ago. It had recorded everything. By morning, the game would change. Danielle arrived for her Thursday shift with a renewed sense of purpose. She held truth like a weapon, ready to expose the rot. Her plan was to gather the veterans, build a coalition, and confront management with an undeniable case. That plan lasted exactly 12 minutes. Danielle Cross, my office. Now. Brad's voice cut through the morning chatter like a cleaver. His face was red, and Linda stood just behind him, expression tight with veiled fury. Every conversation in the break room halted. All eyes turned toward Danielle. She didn't flinch. Is there a problem? She asked, proud that her voice held steady. Brad held up his phone. On the screen was a grainy security image, her and Paul in Linda's office, photos in hand. Want to explain why you were caught snooping through private files after hours? Silence fell like a curtain. Danielle felt the weight of every stare, but she didn't back down. She didn't lie. She didn't deflect. I was looking for proof of theft, she said loudly. And I found it. The room gasped. Linda stepped forward, her face flushing. That's a serious accusation. I have evidence, Danielle said, pulling her notebook from her apron like a weapon. Marcy Torres hasn't received 1 cent of tip distribution since her leave began. Neither have Sandra, Miguel, or Jennifer. Meanwhile, the numbers on the postage sheets don't match our sales. And the money? It's being redirected to fake employees. That's confidential, Brad snapped. You had no right. We had every right, Paul said calmly, stepping into the room, still in his dishwashing apron. Because what you're doing isn't just wrong, it's wage theft, and that's a federal crime. The air in the break room thickened with tension, as if the walls themselves were bracing for a storm. Brad's face went from pink to a furious purple, his jaw tightening like a vice. And who exactly are you to make that determination, Paul? He barked. That tone, that slip of condescension laced with fear, made Danielle turn toward Paul with renewed scrutiny. Something about the way he held himself now was different. The humility in his posture was still there, but underneath it was a quiet, commanding authority. Not the kind you earn from washing dishes, but from leading operations, reading fallout. Paul didn't blink. His voice was measured, calm. Someone who knows enough about restaurant operations to recognize systematic theft when I see it. Before Brad could formulate a comeback, the break room door burst open. Sandra Chin pushed through the crowd, her infant carrier still hanging from one shoulder. Her face was pale and drawn with exhaustion, and the look in her eyes told everyone just how much it had taken for her to show up, still weeks away from the end of her maternity leave. "Wait," she said, her voice strained but determined. "Are you saying they've been stealing from staff on leave? Because I came in today to ask why I haven't gotten any tip payments in 3 weeks, and Linda told me it was because I wasn't actively contributing to the team anymore." A ripple surged through the room, murmurs building to chaos. The dam had broken. "Wait, Miguel never got his either," Rosa shouted from the kitchen. "His wife called me last week, trying to figure out what happened. And Jennifer asked me the same thing right before she left," Marcus added, his voice cracking with disbelief. "She said the numbers didn't add up." Voices overlapped, servers, line cooks, bussers, all now realizing that what they dismissed as personal errors or clerical oversights was in fact a much deeper betrayal. "Enough," Linda barked, trying to regain control. "Everyone calm down. There are explanations. Company policy clearly—" "Show us the policy," Danielle interrupted, stepping forward, fire in her voice. "Because I've read every page of the employee handbook, and nowhere does it say that medical or family leave disqualifies someone from tip distributions." "The system is automated," Brad interjected, his voice desperate. "The tip pool is calculated by corporate software. If there's an error, it's a technical glitch, not theft." Paul stepped forward slowly, and this time, the room fell into a quiet hush. Every eye was on him. "Then you won't mind if we audit that algorithm," he said calmly. "In fact, I'd be very interested to see how your corporate software generated social security numbers for employees who don't even exist." Linda's face blanched instantly, the color draining so fast Danielle thought she might faint. Brad's breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" he croaked. "I'm talking about David Chin, no relation to Sandra, and Maria Rodriguez, no relation to Miguel. Temporary employees who received full-time tip allocations while actual staff members received nothing. Convenient names, fake identities, fabricated paperwork to redirect funds, and I have the documents to prove it." There was no more shouting, just silence. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy gut punch kind, the kind that falls after truth detonates in a room full of people who knew something was wrong, but never imagined it was this deep. Sandra stepped forward, her voice trembling. "These are my bank statements," she said, holding up the papers she'd brought. "I should have gotten $847, 0 cents over the last 3 weeks. I got nothing, and when I asked, they told me I should be grateful just to still have a job." Linda's mouth twisted into a sneer. "This is ridiculous. You're all taking the word of a dishwasher and a server with delusions of grandeur." Danielle didn't back down. "Then prove us wrong," she challenged. "Show us the full records. Explain where the money went. Account for every missing dollar." Brad and Linda exchanged a long, wordless glance, and it said everything. They were cornered, exposed, and everyone in the room knew it. Paul's lips curled into the smallest, quietest smile. It wasn't smug. It was the expression of someone who had just watched justice catch up to corruption. The game had changed. The next morning, Bell's Grill buzzed with tension. Rumors of the confrontation had raced through the staff like wildfire. Some whispered that layoffs were coming. Others feared retaliation. Everyone walked like they were stepping on glass. Danielle arrived early. She hadn't slept. She wasn't sure what to expect. Termination, interrogation, maybe both, but she was done hiding. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. The restaurant's dining room had been transformed. Clipboards lined the bar. Folded laptops sat open on tables. Sharp-dressed men and women, strangers in suits, were setting up what looked like a mobile command center. "What's going on?" Danielle asked Marcus, who stood frozen at the doorway. "No clue," he whispered. "Brad called an emergency all-hands meeting for 10. Mandatory." "Corporate?" she asked. Nodded. "People are saying this might be a shutdown." At 10 a.m. sharp, every employee at Bell's Grill packed into the dining room. Cooks still in aprons, servers mid-shift, dishwashers wiping their hands nervously on towels. Brad stood at the front, pale and visibly sweating. Linda sat beside him, clutching a thick stack of manila folders like they might shield her from the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brad began, his voice trembling, "I want to introduce Robert Langley, Senior VP of Operations for Bell's Corporate." He didn't finish, because from the back of the room, Paul stepped forward. No apron, no towel. He wore a tailored navy suit, his posture now fully upright, no longer hiding. "Actually," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "I'm Robert Langley, owner and CEO of Bell's Grill, all 127 locations." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in gasps of recognition, shock, vindication. Danielle's heart thudded in her chest. She felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. She turned to look at Paul, Robert, and something in his expression told her that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A stunned silence hung so thick you could have sliced it with a butter knife. Danielle could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her chest like a drum line. Around her, jaws hung open. One server actually took a step back, as if the floor beneath them had shifted. "You're what?" Marcus whispered, incredulous. Across the room, Robert, no longer Paul the dishwasher, but Robert Langley, CEO, locked eyes with Danielle. His voice was calm but unwavering. "I've been working undercover for the past month," he announced, "investigating reports of financial irregularities at this location. What I discovered went far beyond my worst expectations." He moved toward the front of the room, his presence now unmistakably that of a leader. Even those who didn't recognize him felt the gravity in the air shift. Brad looked like someone had sucked all the color out of him, and Linda was visibly shaking. "In the last 6 months," Robert continued, "this location has systematically stolen approximately $47,000, 0 cents in tips and benefits, most of it from employees on medical leave, maternity leave, or attending to family emergencies. Some of the most vulnerable people in our organization, betrayed when they needed us the most." Sandra Chin, still holding her child carrier, slowly stood up, her voice barely audible. 47,000. Robert nodded. "Through a scheme involving fake employees, falsified social security numbers, tampered tip distribution logs, and the deliberate exclusion of legitimate workers from the tip pool." "Ah." He pulled out a heavy folder, all of it documented, thanks in large part to the careful, relentless record-keeping of someone you all know. Danielle froze. "Ms. Cross," he said, his voice softening, kept a personal ledger cataloging discrepancies week after week. Her diligence provided the first real crack in what became a much larger fraud. But what truly exposed it was her decision to donate her entire quarterly bonus to a colleague in need. That act of kindness forced management to respond, and in doing so, they revealed what they were trying to hide. The room swiveled toward Danielle, but she couldn't speak. Her mind reeled. She had thought she was fighting alone. She hadn't realized the man beside her had the power to dismantle the entire system. Bragg cleared his throat. "Mr. Langley, I can explain. There were administrative errors, computer issues." "Mr. Kowalski," Robert interrupted, "just yesterday you blamed corporate algorithms. Would you like to explain how those same algorithms fabricated employee records and created ghost workers with invalid social security numbers? The silence that followed was more deafening than a shout. Linda's chair squeaked as she squirmed, a sound so sharp it made several people flinch. I also have, Robert said calmly, pulling another folder from under his arm, bank statements showing repeated transfers from Bell's Grill's operational accounts into personal accounts belonging to Mr. Kowalski and Miss Vasquez. These transfers match, to the dollar, the amounts missing from our staff's tip pool. Linda sprang to her feet, panicking. Those transfers were reimbursements for office supplies, team lunches, employee events. $47,000 0 cents in office supplies? Robert raised a brow. That's a lot of napkins and glitter pens. Someone near the back let out a laugh, quickly muffled, but the ripple spread. The air shifted from tension to vindication. Effective immediately, Robert announced. Mr. Kowalski and Miss Vasquez are terminated for cause. Criminal charges will be filed by the end of the week. Brad collapsed into a chair. Please, he whispered. I have a family, a mortgage. Robert didn't flinch. So do the people you stole from. Did you think about Marcy Torres and her mortgage when you blocked her tip payouts during cancer treatment? He turned back to the stunned crowd. Every affected employee will receive full back pay within 48 hours, plus interest. You'll also receive a formal apology from corporate. And for your professionalism and integrity during this ordeal, everyone present today will receive a $1,000 0 cents bonus. Cheers erupted. There were gasps, hugs, hands over mouths, even a few tears. But above all, there was something Danielle hadn't felt here in years. Hope. And finally, Robert said, turning once more to Danielle, we're going to make sure this never happens again, and I know exactly who I want leading that effort. 3 months later, Danielle Cross stood in the same break room, but it felt like an entirely different world. Gone was the gloom, the whispering, the fear. In its place was something revolutionary, transparency. Deputy Marcus Transmandrick had never been more baffled than he had been by where the old faded tip sheets used to hang was now a sleek digital display, updated hourly, showing real-time tip breakdowns, sales figures, and bonus tallies. Each employee could scan a QR code to access their personalized earnings breakdown, down to the last penny. It's like X-ray vision into the payroll, Marcus said beside her, grinning. I never thought I'd actually understand how my check was calculated. Danielle smiled, adjusting her new name tag. Danielle Cross, Operations Integrity Officer. It still felt surreal, but the work, the mission, felt like home. Robert had offered her the position 2 days after the confrontation. I need someone who's seen the problem from the inside, he'd told her, to build something that protects people from the ground up. How's Marcy? Marcus asked. Good, Danielle replied, a warm smile blooming. Really good. She starts back part-time next week. The back pay covered her treatment. And with the new medical leave support fund, she doesn't have to stress about bills anymore. That fund, Danielle's first initiative, had been designed to go beyond restoring what was stolen. It provided a safety net, a place for dignity to live, even in the hardest seasons of life. Danielle, Jenny, now the evening shift supervisor, approached with a tablet. Before the dinner rush, I wanted to show you this. On the screen was a message from Jennifer Walsh, now working at a different location after relocating to care for her ailing mother. Dear Danielle, I heard about the transparency system you created across all Bell's locations. Because of the support I received, I was able to spend my mom's last weeks by her side instead of working doubles to keep the lights on. You didn't just fix a payroll problem. You gave me the gift of time with someone I loved. Thank you. Danielle's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of frustration or exhaustion. They were full of peace and purpose. There's more, Jenny said, swiping to the next screen. Corporate approved your employee advocacy program. Starting next month, every location will have a trained advocate, someone who helps staff navigate issues without fear of retaliation. That program had been born from Danielle's own isolation, the feeling of shouting into a void when no one seemed to care. She knew firsthand how urgently employees needed someone in their corner. Robert stepped into the room, wearing simple jeans and a button-down, just like he had during his undercover shift months ago. He'd become a frequent visitor, dropping in unannounced, talking with cooks, cleaning tables. He meant it when he said the best way to lead was to listen. "How are the numbers?" he asked, nodding at the digital display. "Transparent," Danielle replied. They shared a knowing smile. "I have news," he added, handing her an envelope. The district attorney finalized the case. Brad and Linda took plea deals, 18 months and full restitution. Danielle exhaled, the justice long overdue. "That'll protect more than just us, won't it?" Robert nodded. Their case is already being used as a model for stronger wage theft laws statewide. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from the Georgia Restaurant Association. "Dear Miss Cross, you have been selected as the Employee Advocate of the Year. We'd be honored to have you speak at our annual conference on transparency and ethical reform in the restaurant industry." Danielle laughed, half in disbelief. "A year ago I was counting napkins. Now I'm giving speeches?" Robert chuckled. "And a year ago, I never thought our best dishwasher would become the company's most powerful reformer." As the dinner crowd trickled in and Belle's grill filled with the familiar music of silverware and conversation, Danielle looked around. Not just at a restaurant, but at a community reborn. Her little black notebook, the one where it all started, now sat framed above her desk, not as a relic of injustice, but as a reminder that the most powerful thing an employee could do was pay attention, keep records, and speak up when the numbers didn't add up. Because what had changed here wasn't just a ledger. It was a belief that a workplace could be fair, that dignity was non-negotiable, and that sometimes all it took to start a revolution was a waitress with a calculator and a conscience.